Okay, thank you to everybody for tuning in. We are continuing our shiur after the Chagim, the Chag of uh, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, and it's been a couple of weeks since we've done the shiur. So this week I thought it was kind of like a half a week. So I thought we would ease into it with something a little bit more simple, something that reminds us of what we did last time. And with the recent calamities in Eretz Yisrael, and the shiur is being recorded on October 11th, 2023, so a few days after the mass Hamas killings, I thought it would be interesting to add a couple of points to the shiurim that we gave earlier to things that I found in my research that I considered interesting that might pertain to the somber mood that Klal Yisrael's in right now. So, in short, what we're going to do is we're going to recap what we did. We're going to recap what we did in the past weeks. And I'm sorry if I get a little distracted. It's because we're doing this in a new environment. If anyone's listening on the recording, we started doing this in a new environment that the shul has an in-person learning. So, bear with us. We're going to do a few things to continue the Le'olam Yehei Adam, the previous shurim that we studied. And Kelly Svi Toledano just showed up. And we're going to cover a few things of Le'olam Yehei Adam, and we're going to then speak about the Beracha of Birchat HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. Okay, so let's first start with a little interesting piece of history, and I'm going to share my screen here. Unrelated entirely to the shiur on Tefillah, the events that happened this past Simchat Torah reminded me of a incident in Jewish history that not a lot of people know about. Almost exactly 1,000 years ago, in the year 1024, approximately the year 1024, in the month of September, so roughly Elul or Tishrei, there was a disaster in Eretz Yisrael where probably hundreds, if not thousands, of Jews were massacred. And what occurred was that there was the ruling party in Eretz Yisrael, the ruling party or the ruling government was the Fatimid Caliphate. And the Fatimids, for the most part, exercised control over Eretz Yisrael. They installed a governor, a military commander, over what was called at the time Philistina or Palestine. Now they, the locals there, the local Arabs were Bedouins called the Jarahids, and the Jarahids did not like the Fatimid Caliphate. I don't know if they were Muslim at all. I don't think the Bedouins were Muslim at all. They simply didn't like them, and they got into a tax fight, as always. And the governor kidnapped two of their leaders. And as revenge and as a rebellion, they went ahead and rampaged the town of Ramla and the town of Tiberia. Now, the town of Ramla and the town of Tiberia were the centers of Jewish life in Eretz Yisrael at the time, in the early 1000s, especially the yeshivot, the yeshivot of the Geonim were there. And so hundreds, if not thousands of Jews were massacred in a bloodbath as the Bedouins, the Jarahids, went ahead and just slaughtered as many people as they could find in these cities. And the news of this sent shockwaves throughout the Jewish world, not just because of the Jewish life that was lost, but also because of the yeshivot and the great Torah centers which were affected. This is, remember, 75 years before the Crusades reached Yerushalayim. This is quite early. Now, one of the historical evidences we have of this time was a kinah written by somebody named Rabbi Yosef ibn Abitur. Rabbi Yosef ibn Abitur is a Paitan who is famous for writing the Sfaradi Hoshanot. All the Hoshanot that the Sfaradim say, besides the Temanim, every Sfaradi Kila today, our Hoshanot are said were written by Rabbi Yosef ibn Avitor. Kel Nora Alila, which is famously written by Rabbi Moshe ben Ezra, is a copy of Rabbi Yosef ibn Avitor's earlier piyut, which is called Kel Nora Alila. The avoda that we say in Yom Kippur is written by a Yosef, and many scholars believe that Yosef that wrote the avoda of the Yom Kippur of the Sfaradim is also Rabbi Yosef ibn Avitor. So he's a very, very important paitan in the Sfaradi Uvra. Now, in the Sfaradi yearly cycle. Now, his life story is really interesting. Rabbi Yosef ibn Avitor was originally a scholar in Cordoba, and he was exiled for political reasons. He was exiled out of Cordoba, and he spent most of his life, the rest of his life, really in Egypt. And he was a gigantic scholar. He even the Caliph Al-Hakim hired him to be his personal Talmud advisor. Like, you're gonna, write a commentary on Talmud for me or translate it when I need to. He was like the personal rabbi to Al-Hakim, and probably in his 20s. At a very young age, he was already politically recognized rabbi, a tremendous person. Now, when he went to Egypt, he was in this exile. He was very productive poetically, and he wrote at least 600 poems. What's unique about him is that he wrote his poetry before much of the new forms of Spanish poetry became popular, like the Arabic forms with meter, and the meter and the makam of the Arabs that was transplanted into Hebrew poetry. He wrote most of his poetry in the old Hebrew style rather than in the Spanish Hebrew style. It seems like he was reticent to take these newfangled styles, these new Goyish styles, and add them to the Jewish liturgy, as quite a few people might have been reticent to do at the time. It wasn't until Donash and Menachem ben Saruk were finished their argument that it kind of became mainstream. Now, the one exception that we have from Rabbi Yosef ibn Abitur, where he clearly uses a Arabic meter, is the kina that I'm showing you on the screen right now that I printed out. This is called Bichu Achai, and he wrote this for this calamity in 1024. And he writes it in Mishkal Chazaj. Why Mishkal Chazaj? Because in Hebrew, the meter of Mishkal Chazaj is called Mishkal Hamarnin, the bitter meter. And if anybody knows Adon Olam, right, the makam, the meter for Adon Olam, any tune that you're going to use for Adon Olam will work for this kina. So Bichu Achai v'gam siftu alei Tzion berov hamon kemo misped hadad rimon v'yoshia b'no amon. Essentially saying, come and cry, my brothers, and eulogize for Tzion. Let's eulogize together in the masses, just like the Hespedim which were given in the time of Yoshia and in the time of the Sefer Divrei Hayamim. And then he goes on to explain, and I'm not going to go through the whole piyut because, of course, that's a little bit boring, but he goes on to not just explain, but to describe the horrors that they had heard about in Egypt that had happened to the community in Eretz Yisrael. For example, Bechu ishot mitoharot, cry for this is line I think 15, right? Cry for the holy women, v'nishmarot v'nitharot, who watch upon their purity, asher hayu lezeracham b'tzirehen me'ubarot, who now have the fetuses of Yishmaelim inside of their wombs because they were raped in battle. B'chol bacho alei banot kizaviot mechutavot asher hayu shefachot lashfachot metuavot, and the daughters sold away like slaves of slaves. B'chu bacho v'gam ivlu b'batei knesiot asher paratz paritz chayot u'bahem nikbutzu dayot. Cry for the synagogues which were destroyed and run over by animals. He means wild men. And now the synagogues are nothing but rubble with scavengers like vultures surrounding them. And the most interesting part about this poem for me is where he escapes the kina mode for a second, and he pulls out the artist. And instead of being just a liturgical poet and writing something which might just be a kina, for a second you see his artistic side come out, because he's again writing in an artistic fashion. And he wrote he writes, B'chol bacho l'chayenu. Cry, oh cry, for this, for our lives. Ve'al tivku l'metenu, we shall not cry for our death. L'man kiyot kahem b'chol tavatenu. Meaning, what worries us is not how we might die tomorrow. Us, the survivors, we're not worried about tomorrow. For us, what we cry about is today. We cry about our life because we don't know how we can go on missing the people that we've lost. This artistic, beautiful interpolation here, this beautiful from the heart, where he really comes from the heart and he says how much the Jewish community lost and how difficult it will be to move forward, is really shows you the heart of his own pain, of his personal pain at the calamity that happened. He's like, and don't try to console me, my friends, because if you see of all the renderings, the limbs and the unfortunately the body parts of Jewish people who are littered across Eretz Yisrael, and they have no one to bury them. This is the.
How you doing?
Avner, can you please mute yourself?
Let me ask you something. Do you know where?
Yeah.
Do you pass by? Basically, I have a watch here that needs to. I think I know better.
1 second, I have to.
I'm sorry, Tzaddik. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. There we go. Okay, no worries. Okay. That was fun. Okay, so that's so much for that kina. I thought everyone would find it interesting, and I found it striking that it happened almost exactly 1,000 years since the calamities in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, let's move on forward. Last week I'm going to do this quickly because I wanted to get into the Beracha of Birchat HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim that we say in L'Olam Yehei Adam. First of all, let's recap. L'Olam Yehei Adam, Yerei Shemayim B'Seiter Kival Galoi is a tefillah which is sourced in a midrash called Tana Devei Eliyahu. In the oldest Sidurim, I'm showing you here an example from Ashkenaz on the slideshow. If you want to come around, you could see it. You'll see the Olam they started with Ribon HaOlamim because they didn't believe the Olam was part of the tefillah, and it starts after Birkat HaShachar before we don't
see a slideshow. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
We don't see a slideshow. Sorry.
No problem. Let's see. Let's try this again. You see it now? Go ahead. You see it now? Beautiful. So you have the Birkat HaShachar end up here on the right side with the Yirat Tzom Lefanecha Hashem. And then they begin Ribon HaOlamim, which is the core of L'Olam Yehei Adam. And then it goes all the way until the Birkat Torah, and then finally the Korbanot. Eventually, as time moved on, with the influence of the Tur and the Rush, they pushed Birkat Torah earlier. But this is the earliest. And again, I'm summarizing last week's shiur. This is how L'Olam Yehei Adam used to appear. And let me show you the Nusach. Many of the Sfaradim said Baruch HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. The Ashkenazim say Baruch Hashem HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. This is attested to in the Tosafot. It's attested to here in the manuscript. You'll see it says Baruch Hashem HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. Some say Mekadesh Shimo, some say Mekadesh Et Shimo, some say Mekadesh Shimo Berabim, etc. There's various different versions, and the meaning is kind of loose. But I'll just read with you the paragraph that we have here that the Sfaradim say today, just for clarity. You are one before the world was created. You are one after the world was created. You are the God of this world. You are the God of the next world. You are forever eternal, and your days are not numbered. Right? Sanctify your name in your world through your people who sanctify your name. And through your salvation, our King, we shall lift up our stature, and you shall save us soon for your name's sake. Baruch HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. Blessed is he who sanctifies his name among the masses. Rav Schwab likes to point out, Makdish Shemecha means those who are cause others to be Mekadesh Hashem. Just grammatically speaking, when you say Makdish Shemecha, you mean people who die al Kiddush Hashem, because people who die al Kiddush Hashem are people who cause other people to also go ahead and do a Kiddush Hashem by living their life al Kiddush Hashem. Makdish Shemecha means people who live their life by causing other people to also do a Kiddush Hashem. So that usually means people who give their life for Kiddush Hashem. We spoke about it last week, how L'Olam Yehei Adam has the tonality and has the content which seems to lend the idea that it was written by people under persecution who were not allowed to recite Kriyat Shema. I'm sorry if I'm moving a little bit quickly. We saw that there's 5. So in order to hunt down when this time was, we saw that there are 5 eras or 5 claims, or 5 different, around 5 different eras where it's possible that Lo'olam Yehei Adam might have been written. So Tana Devei Eliyahu, there's 5 different opinions. One that was written in the 3rd century by Tana, another that was written in the later 3rd century by Rav Anan, as the Gemara says in Bavli. There's another shita that was written in the 5th century under the Sassanids and the Persians. Another 2 shitot that was written in Bavel or Italy in the 9th or 10th centuries. Okay, so the one that interested us last week was the third era, which is the Sassanid Empire, because the Sassanid Empire very famously forbade Jewish people from saying Kriyat Shema. They were Zoroastrian, they believed in 2 gods, and Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad was heresy to them. And so for a period of time, Yazdegerd II forbade the Jewish people from saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Therefore, the suspicion of many scholars is that this tefillah was written under the Sassanid rule in what was at the time called Iran Shahar, and I'm just recapping here, the region. And when Jews were under Yazdegerd II and they had this takana, they wrote this tefillah, Lo'olam Yehei Adam Yerushalayim B'Sedek V'Agloy, Ribon HaOlamim, this tefillah of Ribon HaOlamim, they wrote for people to say at home before they came to shul, because there were guards at shul that didn't allow the Chazan to say Shema Yisrael. That's one claim. It's very complicated to really make that claim because there's 12 different opinions, almost 12, about when this tefillah was written. When was Tana Devei Eliyahu written? 5 different eras, 12 different opinions. Who wrote it? Who wrote this midrash? When it was written? It was clearly written by one person, but exactly when we don't know. So it's a little far-fetched. We can't pinpoint it exactly, but it's a very attractive solution to the problem. So we brought it up last week. And here I have a coin of Yazdegerd II, who was famously assassinated in his sleep probably by the noble families of Iran, the Sassanid Empire. Okay, let me just stop the share because I believe I need to figure out why my slides are a little bit amok. Let me figure this out. Okay, no, my slides are not amok. My slides are actually are doing fine. Okay, let's just figure this out. Give me a sec. I'm gonna share my screen. Tell me, please tell me again if you can't see the screen share. Okay, here we go. Okay. Sorry for everybody listening to the recording if this is a little bit boring. Okay, here we go. So, regarding this Beracha Beracha HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim, I said last week that it's a well-known legend that people who should die al Kiddush Hashem, people who are prepared to die for Kiddush Hashem, for example, the Nazis are going to kill you, Hamas, God forbid, is about to kill somebody, and you know you're about to die al Kiddush Hashem. There's an old legend that a person should say Birchat Hashem al Keinu Melech Asher Kedushanim B'Svotim Sivanu HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. The problem is, and it would be based on this bracha here in Le'olam Yehei Adam. The problem with that is that it's not in the Gemara anywhere, and it's not in the Rishonim anywhere. It's not in the Gaonim anywhere. It's not in the Medrash anywhere. Who in the world decided that if you're one person supposed to die, that you're supposed to say this bracha? And when I went around the yeshiva asking people about this, nobody seemed to know, but everybody seemed to know this legend. The one thing they did know is they knew the legend of the Graf Potocki, where the famous Avram ben Avram. Avram ben Avram was a convert in Lithuania. And sorry, not in Lithuania, he was Polish, of course. The Potocki family was a very, very powerful, very wealthy Polish noble family. They had a son who went off the derech. He didn't become Christian anymore. He got very interested in Judaism. He converted to Judaism, got himself in a lot of trouble because he would not convert back to Christianity, and he was adamant that Judaism was the correct religion. He gave himself a Brit Milah, gave himself the name Avram ben Avram. Beautiful, full-fledged Jew. The problem was his family found out. They tried to force him. He wouldn't listen. Eventually, the authorities got involved, and he was going to be put to death for some reason, whether it was heresy or whatever fake law they figured out to put him to death for. Now, there's a lot of detail to this story. If you want to look it up, search for Avram ben Avram or the Graf Potocki. I think his name was Valentin Potocki. And you'll find lots of information about this. But the legend is that the Vilna Gaon told him that before he gets killed al Kiddush Hashem, he should say Baruch Hashem al HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. Nobody seemed to know where it came from, but eventually I managed to hunt it down. It is only Mepia Shmua. It is only something which is reported person to person. It was never actually written down by the Gra himself. Instead, it seems that Rav Schwab heard from Rav Elchanan Wasserman, who probably in turn heard from the Chafetz Chaim, that this is what happened. But it wasn't actually something that was ever written down. And I found this in the Sefer of Schwab on Prayer, page 61, where Schwab said this in one of his shiurim on Tefillah. Now, that's the legend. But an anecdote doesn't have any halachic basis, right? You can't take an anecdote and say that this is going to be admissible in a court of law. You're not going to say that you're going to suddenly put this into Shulchan Aruch just because of an anecdote from the Gra. So I kept on hunting, and this information was unfortunately very hard to find. And just picture it as a picture of Elchanan Wasserman. So Baruch Hashem, the next place I found this was 500 years ago in the Shla. The Shnei Luchot HaBrit was written by Yeshaya Levi Horowitz, who was one of the great of based in Europe. He was the Rav in Prague. He was the Rav in many places, and eventually moved to Eretz Yisrael. The Shla, in his Sefer, in his topic where he speaks about the mitzvah of Amunah, in the middle of nowhere, decides to go on a halachic tangent. And he says, I believe, this is 500 years ago, in the late 1500s, I believe, he suggests this out of thin air. I believe that a person who is about to die al Kiddush Hashem should say Asher Keddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu l'kadesh Shimo Berabim. The Shla is the first person to put pen to paper and say, I believe that a person who's going to be Mekayim this mitzvah, which is a mitzvah saseh v'niktashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, should say a bracha. Why not? He says, and he gives a whole halachic argument. It's a mitzvah saseh. You're going to do it before you do it. And none of the exclusions should apply. So he goes through all of the exclusions. The thing is that the early poskim struggled with exactly what the rhyme or reason was to when Chazal created brachos for some mitzvot and not for other mitzvot. For example, we have a bracha on lulav, we don't have a bracha on mishloach manos. We have a bracha on tefillin, but we don't have a bracha on tzedakah. So why exactly do some mitzvos have brachos and some mitzvot do not have brachos? So we discussed earlier on our shiur on brachot that it's really a misconception. This point of view is a misconception. Most of the brachot that we have on mitzvot aseh are the liturgical survival of some of the most popular brachot in the time of the Tanaim. But there was never once a council of rabbis that got together and decided together that there's going to be these brachot for these mitzvot. There was never rules set for. There were certain rules for how a bracha should be structured that got decided in the mid-time of the Tanaim, but what mitzvah should have which bracha, that precisely never had a specific council which decided which one should and which one shouldn't. Regardless, the Rishonim do have a whole debate about what are the exclusions. So, for example, some say that if you have a mitzvah where the mitzvah might not actually get accomplished, like tzedakah, right? You're going to go to get somebody, give him $10, but he won't accept it. If he doesn't accept it, or he doesn't accept your mishloach manos, you weren't mekayim the mitzvah, right? So that's just one example of such an exception. So perhaps the Shla argues, so too with Kiddush Hashem. You might want to die al Kiddush Hashem. Someone's about to shoot you. His gun jams, and then he gets shot in the head, and you never were mekayim the mitzvah. So maybe you shouldn't say a bracha for something where you weren't mekayim the mitzvah. For that example, for that type of exclusion, the Shla says, no shaykhis. You were still mekadesh Shem Shemayim. You still were mekayim the mitzvah. You still went ahead and were mekayim the what's it called? You did what you were supposed to do. You still made a Kiddush Hashem. So it doesn't matter if the person did or didn't shoot you. At the end of the day, you were mekayim the mitzvah. This lends to the famous joke of the brisker guy who says the bracha, and then the guy runs away, and he goes no, like he thought it was a hefsek. He has to shoot him right away. So what's it called? So the Shla goes through a different halachic objections to this, and eventually he settles on this nusach of likadesh Shimo Berabim. Why a lamed instead of an al? Because likadesh you can only do it yourself. You can't do it with a shliach, and therefore you should say likadesh Shimo Berabim. Very interesting. Now, this is what the Shla himself says. what's incredible is that the Shla found support for this in a Rishon, the Rabbi Menachem Rekanati. Rabbi Menachem Rekanati should not be confused with Rekanati, the winery in Eretz Yisrael. Every winery in Eretz Yisrael tries to name themselves after a Rishon. You have Rashi, Rekanati, Abu Dirham, Abarbanel, Ibn Ezra. What's the other ones? I have no idea. There's 1,000 different wines named after Rishonim. But Rekanati is really a commune in Italy. And Rabbi Menachem Rekanati was a scholar, a very peculiar scholar who was a Mekubal, a mystic who lived in Italy in the late 1200s. He's very peculiar because he accepted both the Kabbalah of the Hasidei Ashkenaz and the Kabbalah of the Zohar at the same time. Moshe Idel, who's a famous scholar of Kabbalah, wrote an entire book on Menachem Rekanati to try to dissect exactly what kind of mind he had and his theologies and how he thought about Kabbalah. But he's famous for writing the Pirush Rekanati ala Torah, which is a mystical Pirush on the Torah. Regardless, Menachem Rekanati, this mystical obscure Rishon, wrote in his Psakim, he has a few Shailot Tshuvot where he has halachic rulings. In number 70, number Ayin, out of the blue, he says, HaMekadesh Et Hashem, people who are Mekadesh Hashem, Chayavim Levarech al Kiddush Hashem, have to say a Beracha al Kiddush Hashem, Hanichbad v'Hanara, Kivan du mitzvat asay d'oraita, because it's a mitzvah asay, Dichtiv v'Knektashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, as the pasuk says, Knektashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. He doesn't say a nusach, but he does say that a person should be chayav in saying Birchat Kiddush Hashem. It is only the Shla who borrows this nusach of the Olam Yehe Adam, and he's the one who says that a person should say Baruch Hashem Asher Kedushat Sosisvanu al HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. Okay, so the next instance of this bracha's history is with Rav Ephraim Ushri. Rav Ephraim Ushri was a Rav in Europe during the Holocaust, a very famous Rav. His son has a shul here in Flatbush on East 17th Street. Adi Yom Hazeh. So Rav Ephraim Ushri led the Jews through one of the concentration camps. He was the Rav in the camps. He was the Rav in the Kovna ghetto, and he was a Paisik. And he wrote after the war, after all the trauma and the horrible, crazy, unspeakable tragedies that he saw, and the unspeakable she'elot that he was asked during the Holocaust, he wrote a sefer called She'elot Tshuvot Mimamakim, which is a response from the depths, where he speaks about all of the life and death questions that he received during the obliteration of during the Holocaust itself, during the obliteration of his fellow kinsmen. And some of these questions and the stories he writes will really, it's something to read on Tisha B'Av. It'll make you cry for hours if you just read the questions he was asked about sons asking if they could kill their fathers, if they can't, shailas of agunais, shailas of unbelievable cruelty from the Nazis, unbelievably cruel things, and unbelievable courage that he saw. People who wanted to eat matzah and put on tefillin, and the incredible sheilot that he was asked inside the concentration camps are all recorded in a 4-volume set called Sheilot Tshuvot Mimamakim. So on page 29 of volume 2, he records that he was asked the Shaila, do we need to say a bracha if we're going to die al Kiddush Hashem? And the story is incredible. There was a person named Rabbi Yahu. He doesn't say his last name, but he was from Warsaw. The guy escaped the Varsha ghetto, and he came to Lita thinking he would escape the Nazis, but the Nazis got to Lita anyway. And as he was being rounded up in the Kovna ghetto, him and Rav Ephraim Ushri, this tzaddik runs over to Rav Ephraim. He's like, Rabbi, if I'm going to die al Kiddush Hashem, what bracha do I need to say? And I want to tell everybody. And so he replied. He explained to him the bracha. He decided to tell him the bracha of the Shla. The man repeated it in his mouth until he knew it, and then he went and told everybody that they should say it before they die al Kiddush Hashem. Later, the man survived long enough to come back to Rabbi Ushri, I don't know how many days later, and he told him, by the way, I heard of Elchanan Wasserman also told his son this, because Rav Elchanan Wasserman famously and very tragically, Rav Elchanan Wasserman returned to Europe to be with his Talmidim, to die with his Talmidim. Even though he was in America collecting money for his yeshiva, he went back to Europe to die with his Talmidim al Kiddush Hashem. And he heard that Rav Elchanan Wasserman, before he died of Kiddush Hashem, told his son and told the people around him, he heard from the Chavetz Chaim, they should say, Baruch HaMekadesh, Baruch Asher Kiddush Hashem L'Kadesh Et Shimo Berabim, like the Shla, perhaps like the story of the Gra. And that was apparently what they must have said. And they said, first say the Bracha and then say Shema. That was the halachic ruling he gave. But he enlightened me to another source that I didn't know about. And I'm going to say it for you here because I didn't have time to find it inside. There's a Sheilot Uchuvot called Yosef Ometz, not from the Chida, but from one of the Rabbanim of Frankfurt. And this Rabbi Yosef in Frankfurt has a fascinating tshuva where he invents his own nusach. And his nusach, he invents his own bracha. Listen to how it goes. Baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, and God commanded us, la'ahov shem hanechbad v'hanora, to love his holy and awesome name, hahaya hahove v'ha'atid liyot, who was, is, and always will be, b'chol levaveinu, with all our hearts, b'chol nafshenu, and with all our soul, u'lekadesh shmo berabim, and to sanctify his name in public. Baruch ata Hashem HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. And then ve'acher kach yomar, a person should say Shema Yisrael v'imsar tzavaron, he should give his neck for al Kedushat Shemo, for sanctifying God's name. So here we have a tremendous amount of not a tremendous amount, but quite a few rabbis who have kept this halacha, or decided on this halacha to say this bracha to die al Kiddush Hashem. The reality, the halachic reality of this bracha, however, is as follows. The halachic reality is that without knowing who wrote this medrash of L'olam Yehei Adam, we cannot know if it's early enough to justify saying it with Shemu Malchut. The poskim have a rule that if we don't find the bracha in the Talmud, we shouldn't say it. If you don't find the bracha in the Mishnah, you don't find the bracha in the Talmud, we really shouldn't say it. And as a general rule, that's why the Sfaradim don't say Birchat Hashem, Mekadesh. As a general rule, that's why the Sfaradim don't say Birchat Hashem, Mekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. However, the Ashkenazim have a mitzvah to say Birchat Hashem, as was the early Nusach, and therefore they continue saying it. Regardless, because we don't have a Talmudic source for this bracha, we cannot go ahead and ascertain that a person who's going to die al Kiddush Hashem should go ahead and say Baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav l'kadesh et Shimo Berabim. We can't paskin that. We can't say, yes, a person must say this bracha, and this is the halacha. The Gemara never said that. We can't write that in the Shulchan Aruch. The fact is, however, between you and me, if I was to die al Kiddush Hashem, and I knew I was going to die al Kiddush Hashem, I don't think that's something they're going to complain about in Shemayim. If a person wants to say this bracha, whether or not it's legitimate al pi halacha, the fact is, 500 years, maybe 800 years if Rabbanim approve of it. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful tradition. Whether or not it's halachically perfect is another discussion. But the fact that so many Jews in history had the courage, had the beyond the courage, but really the piety and the love of God to go ahead and remember and to practice and to memorize this prayer, to willingly give up their names l'shem Shemayim, is really a beautiful thing, regardless of its halachic purity. The I should say the majesty of this bracha should stand on its own. So that's so much for the bracha of HaMekadesh Et Shimo Berabim. We will continue, God willing, next week. I mean, we could go on to the lower criticism of all the text in L'olam Yehei Adam. I did accomplish that last time in the earlier shiurim. I think it was shiur number 10. I'm not sure what it was, but it would be called Atu Hashem or Ribon Alamim. If anybody's interested in those earlier shiurim to actually analyze the text, please go backwards in time. But going forward, I think we're going to study the Korbanot more specifically. So thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. And I will pause the recording here.